All right, guys, we are live. So everybody got Scott and Susan here today. And you know what's cool about Scott and Susan Westwater, I'll throw their last name in here for you. They are Alexa experts. And I really hate to say her name very much because my studio is completely connected to the round device that's called a name. But Scott and Susan know so much about getting our brands. Like they literally wrote the book, and they're the people, and I mean this with all due respect, you guys, they wrote the book on that all the super nerds read about how to make this happen. They are the super nerds, the nerd Jedis. So if you want your brand like I do, or your client's brand like I do, on Alexa or Google or Siri or whoever else, if you want them being recognized by the way people are really interacting right now, Scott and Susan are actually the people who've designed a lot of this and written a lot of the content that everybody's leaning in on right now to understand how to do it. So Scott and Susan, that was a really long introduction, but welcome and thanks for spending some time with us, especially at this holiday season. Oh my gosh, what a time to get the right buttons clicked so we can all get ourselves out there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's great to have you here. So where are you guys calling from?
We are right outside of Chicago. So the Chicagoland area. I know that there's people who are sensitive if you say you're in Chicago. We're not proper, but were proper 3 years ago and then decided to have a really big backyard. So
you want life? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I get that. Totally get that. All right. So let's do this. People, as always, you can ask questions all you want as we dive in. Hey, everybody. Great to see y'all. I see people jumping in there. Ask questions. Good morning, CN. CN's awesome. She hangs out with us so often. CN, you're great.
Awesome.
So make sure that you ask questions as we go along because there's a little bit of nerdy detail. In fact, there's probably a lot here that I don't even know about. And I want to make sure that we really get to understand what we need to do. So first of all, Scott and Susan, I just selfishly, and I'm sure about the same question, I want to know, and maybe you have to go into a little bit of background or theory to help me understand this, but how do I get the Alexa device or whatever device we use in our home to recommend me or say my brand or my client's brand in a relevant way when they ask, hey, do you know Alexa, tell me about this or that? How do I get that to happen? And if you need to show us graphics or whatever to give us background, help us understand, do that.
Well, there's a few different ways. And the first way that I'll start with is actually through traditional SEO. So if you make sure that your content on your website is optimized for voice, and actually I will pull up a screen real quick just to kind of give you a flavor of what that means. So bear with me 1 second.
No, you're good. Thanks.
Visuals are a lot easier with some of this because it is a little bit abstract. By nature, voice experiences don't have graphics. There are things that we call multimodal, which is like your the Echo Show or your Google Nest. But right now, that's only like 13% of users. So we live in a world right now where it's primarily voice only, and it is evolving. But then that means that as content folks like to say, I can't use graphics to bail myself out. Yeah. So that's where the words become incredibly important. And as Scott is going to talk a little bit about voice search, the words become even more important.
Yeah. Okay.
So last year, over 250 billion web searches were conducted with voice, and that's in the US. So when everyone has this, there's this common misconception that this is a future technology, it's 5 years down the road, it's here, and we have the data that shows it. So this accounts for about 15 or so % of all the searches that happened on Google last year were actually voice, which is incredible, right? So that tells you that this is something to pay attention to, and it's expected that this is going to be a much bigger number this year, especially with everyone being home, because of COVID and other issues like that. We've already seen data points showing that these usage numbers have gone through the roof this year. So when you talk about SEO, it really is incumbent upon brands, agencies, practitioners to stop thinking of things in terms of keywords and start thinking of it in what we call long tail. And what that means is it's the full phrase or the question that your audience actually has on that given topic. So when you talk to someone, normally you don't just throw out a word and expect them to understand what you're asking for. you would actually say, instead of like car, hey, where can I find a red convertible, in my area or something like that. And so it's those longer tail phrases that have a lot more context in it. As long as you're creating content that has that information in it, you're going to start to show up in search as people start searching on their mobile device, on their smart speakers, on their multimodal devices, whatever. So this is kind of the first point of it. And then what we move into is this world specifically around Alexa, where when you ask Alexa a question, first it looks into its internal database. So what's the temperature? What's the traffic like? What did the Blackhawks do last night? Things like that. Those are all things that it knows in its internal database. If it doesn't have the answer, it actually goes out to the second ring, which we're calling the voice web, which is effectively Amazon Alexa skills. So that would be just like creating your own application on a mobile device, except specifically to Alexa. And so what it's doing is going, hey, does any of these skills have this information? Is it credible? Have they updated it recently? Are people coming back to it? There's some ranking factors, much like traditional SEO, that if Alexa says, yep, that's the one that's got the answer, it's going to give that answer instead of going out to the regular web. And then finally, you have the regular web, which works as traditional SEO does right now. The dirty little secret with voice devices and voice assistants right now is if someone asks a question, you're probably going to get an answer from Wikipedia. And if it's on the medical side, probably WebMD, because the device manufacturers, Amazon, Google, etc., wanted to provide some sort of an answer. And because those properties have such high domain authority, they're going to outrank a lot of the websites that exist. So
yeah. So how do we compete with that?
So really, the way to compete with it is optimize your web content, understand what people are actually looking for on your existing websites, social properties, etc., and then take that content and actually create something in that kind of middle tier. The Alexa skills on Google, it's called a Google action. And basically what you're going to be able to do is over time, as you get people using your skill, as you promote it and, drive traffic to it, you're going to actually be the answer specifically for that question. So, it could be for specific surgery. It could be for a specific product or service. We like to say that this is actually your opportunity to own the answers for your industry. And so when you start thinking about things in that context, it's a huge opportunity, especially for someone that might be in a 2, 3, 4 position and they're not the number one in their industry. This is a way that they can actually start providing relevant information that their audience is looking for, and then effectively choke off the traffic that's going to other competitors' websites. So this is an incredibly important thing to understand. The other thing to understand is right now there's no paid search in this world. So this is really all organic. So there's some legwork you have to do. But ultimately, if you want to really take advantage and start to lay that groundwork, it's creating the Alexa skills, the Google actions, and those native applications so that you're the one that's found when people look.
And so the bigger players can't buy me out right now. They can't.
Not right now, no.
And actually, one of the fun things you can do is, I think Coca-Cola is still managed by Wikipedia. I know Nike is. If you ask your device about that, your smart speaker, it's going to give you a Wikipedia answer, which is kind of mind-blowing to know how many millions of dollars have been spent on branding campaigns.
So even Coke and Nike, brands that big, aren't even taking advantage of this yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. I mean, Coke has done just a little bit of some proof of concept and did phenomenally well. They did a promotion where you could share a Coke in Australia. And they had intended that it would be a couple-week program. And within the first, I think, 48 hours, they had to double the amount of product that they had allocated because they'd gone through it so quickly. Wow. There is a novelty factor. One other thing, too, to know is that when it comes to Amazon devices, their default search engine is Bing. It's not Google. So
really?
So that's another thing to think through is it isn't the almighty Google. But and as Scott said, it's not just the smart speakers. It's these guys that people are using as well, because your Google Assistant works on your phone. Actually, so does Amazon Alexa. A lot of people don't use their Amazon Alexa apps on their mobile devices, but it's something to also be aware of, is that that, Google Assistant is somewhat ubiquitous if when you think about all of the devices that has it enabled on it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's so true. Okay. So walk me through a little bit of practice. This is mind blowing because there's so much that, I'm just thinking of questions like, for people who watch this episode, think about your brand or your client's brand. So as many of you in our group know, we work with my brand, Done For You Service Agency. We work with surgeons in subspecialties, many of them elective, like cosmetic, plastic type surgeons. So if they're in, I'm going to pick a town we don't work in. If they're in Miami, Florida, and like literally if somebody says to their device, can you recommend a plastic surgeon in Miami, Florida? I would want my client to show up in that search.
Right.
How?
So that's actually where, at least on the Google side, the Google My Business comes into play. And so one thing that not a lot of people know of in kind of the marketing world is Google actually has a service called Google My Business. And so most companies don't actually have that enabled. But if you're a service provider that has location specific or geographic specific locations, if you enable that and someone on their Google device, or if they're on Siri, quite frankly, because that uses Google search as well. I'm looking for a plastic surgeon. I'm looking for a pest control company. I'm looking for whatever around me. That's actually going to be how you start to get that, especially when it comes to contact information, hours of operation, phone number, etc. There's actually a company that I know out of Florida, actually a little bit north of Miami, that works with a pest control company. And when the pest control company enabled their Google My Business search tool, they went from 35 inbound calls a week to 750. And when they actually looked at the traffic and tried to figure out where it was coming from, he said it was about 75 to 80% of that traffic was actually coming from someone literally going with their phone like this, I need a pest control company around me. And that was actually how they were able to get all those inbound requests. So, so if you are a clinic, if you are a individual practitioner's office and you have like location specific, that's something you can absolutely do like today and turn it on. And you should start to see the benefit if your audience is actually looking for your product or service that way. You should start to come up relatively quickly.
Great question. Okay. Kimberly says I have an Echo Show in my kitchen. And then also a question here. Is there a special button, by the way, welcome everybody. Great to see everybody. Is there a special button to check with Google My Business, or does it just show up if your listing is updated?
That's actually a great question. I don't know all the ins and outs of the tool itself. I know the basic setup of it.
Yeah.
I do know that actually, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Google Duplex, which is the artificial intelligence that it got a lot of press. Was it last year?
Yeah.
Because someone was they were using a demo where it was showing that they were booking restaurant reservations and hair appointments at salons and things like that. And it literally was almost like your PA calling and doing this. And it was, it raised a lot of questions that people pumped the brakes on, of saying, wait a minute, these people didn't know they were talking to a computer. This is artificial intelligence. Oh my gosh, what if it becomes sentient, and then, it rolls. And artificial intelligence right now is not in a place where it can get sentient just right now for sure. But one thing
that's what it's told you though.
Right, exactly. Hold on. No, I'm feeling a shock right now. But what's really interesting is Google just used Duplex to do an entire check of the inventory of all the business listings to see who's right, whose hours are correct. And that was why they did it. A bunch of folks are like, oh, they're training it. And they're like, no, we're just making sure that the listings are right. So to that question, more than likely, I think that is where they're starting to call, and they're also starting to give preference. Google has been trying to figure out how to make this work without giving preferential treatment, because that would be unacceptable. In the voice world, as Scott was saying, we don't have paid right now. And part of the reason is because it's when you have paid and sponsored ads, as we know, we have to say it's a sponsored ad. There is no elegant way to do that and then be like, and here's the organic. and that's part of that is the compelling part of it. Of it's no longer a sheet of 10 blue links where you're like someone figures out where's the first organic one, or they just click on the first link they see. There's only like position 0. And so they're trying to figure out how do you monetize that, because it's Google, let's be honest. And they're trying to figure out how do we do that. So that's where then you do get your Google My Business shored up, make sure that your everything's right. And especially right now with COVID, hours of operation is a big deal. That's actually something that we've been dealing with a lot for some of our clients of how do I update it here? Can I update it? I need to update it in every spot. Yeah. The other side of it is your content.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's your listing. And so you've already got this content, right? You've got a website. The easiest and best way to control the experience that someone's going to have with your brand is to create that skill or that action. It's in 90 million homes in the United States. So it makes sense that someone can just, if they ask about your brand, and there are ways when you build a skill that has like what's called a can fulfill intent, that you say, I can answer this question. And it's basically like, I'm going to raise my hand, pick me, teacher. And as you get more, basically more traction from a perspective of good ratings and reviews, traffic, that you are also updating it on a fairly frequent basis.
Yeah.
That will then start to be like that. It's just like, in class when the teacher keeps calling on the same kid who gets the answer right, same thing.
Yeah.
So how do I, with Google or Alexa or Siri, how do I log into that program and show them like what to say? Like, does that make sense? How do I start that process?
There are platforms that exist.
Yeah.
So it really depends on how complex you need to get. So for something basic, Alexa has something called an Alexa blueprint, where you can basically almost Mad Lib style fill in some things. And they've got templates for restaurants, they've got templates for dentists or whatever. And you just kind of fill in the information, and then it publishes your skill for you. There's another level up where there's companies like Witlingo, Engage. There's a few other platforms that exist where you can actually use those platforms to create both the Google Assistant application and the Alexa application. And you're effectively just uploading your content. So you could go through and do something at that level if you need something a little bit more sophisticated.
Sure.
And then, kind of like WordPress for voice experiences, quite
that's a good way to look at it.
It is very much like you put in the information, and so there's the questions or the intents or what the requests are, and then you go from there. And then how do I answer this? The science that comes into that is then seeing essentially what is being asked and what's not getting an answer, or what is getting an answer. And that's a big question of, and that's where then the logic and the natural language processing we talk about, that's where the artificial intelligence comes in, as it starts to say, if I said 10 tea times, right? Am I saying I want tea time? I want TEE for golf. Yeah. Or am I looking for setting up high tea with someone? And so it's figuring out context so that you can start to control that within your actual experience. When it comes to creating in the wild web content, and we actually have we had a search partner who did some testing on this. It's about making sure that your H1s and other headlines start to match those long tail. And it is more than putting a question mark at the end of your headline. Like there are those, like, conversational design does have pieces to it, because it's not, there's aspects to it and the nuances, which we all are aware of, but it is making sure that you're answering sort of those long tail and knowing what your users are asking about. And you start to look at owning keyword phrases, as opposed to I want to own a whole keyword topic area, because it's like the person who's going to ask this question is going to be like my key audience. It's
a more specific.
Yeah.
It's
definitely, and it's not needle in a haystack as much. Now I see Cian's question about how do I see the traffic that comes in from voice search. That is what a handsome question. There are a few things that
That's a good long tail question.
It is. Actually, it's a perfect long tail question.
It is a perfect. Right now, some of that information isn't being shared openly.
So I can't look at the Google Analytics thing and like shows you all the different sources and it says this came in from a device.
So here's the challenge. It all shows up as direct right now.
Okay.
So everything that comes in through your search console and your search tools right now is direct. Okay. So there's really no way to know. But if you start looking at the phrases, you should start to be able to understand longer tail versus keyword.
Let me keep going on Cian's questions here.
Yeah.
How does Siri fit into the voice search? By the way, anybody else watching, if you have questions, fire away and ask them. You got Susan and Scott on the phone right now. This is a one in a lifetime chance.
So Siri's a really interesting animal at this point. We're not quite sure what Apple's up to, but what we can say from a search perspective, it uses Google. Yeah. The default, the way it's set by default is Google. If the user wants, they can go through and change it to Bing, or I think Yahoo's another option. But really, any of the rules that apply to Google search would actually apply specifically to Siri search. When it comes to what Apple's up to kind of in the bigger ecosystem when it comes to voice, we've heard rumors that they're building Siri from the ground up, or rebuilding it, I should say. And it's taken longer than anticipated. Apple did just come out with a HomePod Mini, so they're at least showing that there is still some interest. But with them and Samsung, it's been really interesting to watch because unlike Amazon, Apple and Samsung have an entire ecosystem of products that they're building voice into. And so that's a very different challenge than just building a standalone speaker that, you only have to support one or a couple devices. So when it comes to Siri right now, there's something called a Siri shortcut where you can open up a specific application, say on your iPhone, and even call specific functions of it. But there's no deep integration like on the Alexa skill side or on the Google Action side, at least right now.
Okay.
And it's interesting because with I think it is iOS 14, there are some small things that they've done that show that that Apple is poking around search. But they're not quite ready there to poke the big bear that is playing with, fighting with Google. Right. It is kind of interesting to see the clash of titans between Amazon and Google about how they manage content. We all know that Google's been managing content a lot longer than Amazon. So it's been an interesting thing to watch, but that's then also why we have a tendency to, as opposed to setting up a Google, your Google Action through the Action Builder, and then setting something up in your Amazon Alexa, there is some basically some efficiency in using some of these platforms, because that way then it's in the same place and you're able to kind of like cut the work a little bit, because I know that the concern that we hear a lot is, oh my God, it's another freaking channel I have to manage.
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking too.
And the good news is a lot of this information. So if these are questions that you're getting from your customer service line, if these are questions like, as we had talked about use cases, and I think that's the biggest thing that helps you understand is chances are you've thought about your customer journey. Chances are you've already thought through what are the pain points, what are the things that you're looking through. And I think Scott's getting ready to show a graphic to kind of show how this works. You're able to think through, you've got your content there. You know how you're solving some of these problems. Leverage that. Now, you can't just pick up, just like you can't take a brochure and put it on a web page. You can't take your web content and throw it into a skill, but you have a good place to start from. So that's some of your lion's share. And what's really, really good about that is it makes you consistent too. So that's where we looked. And so we created this graphic to kind of help, because a lot of times I think what still gets pressed a lot is voice as the product. It's all your games. It's all these, what are just basically all roads lead to this one thing, right? And it might even be utility, like tell me the weather, tell me all this stuff. And then the other part of this is the whole voice is a part of a customer experience, which is then where it's saying, how do I help this augment, enhance, guide keep my, whoever it is it my patient, is it my client, is it my customer, moving them forward. And so then you start to see that this isn't just a consumer facing, it's B2B as well, because it's that same piece of how do I take some from awareness to getting them to either sign up for an engagement or make a purchase. And you can support that. And you can also help with retention. We talked about use cases of like, if you're a physician, discharge information after, because as you're sitting there and you're getting sent out, you've still got anesthesia or whatever have you, or you forgot. And instead of having your pager go off at 2 a.m, they can actually, you have this 24/7 access of someone where you can ask them standard questions. Is it, obviously it's not going to be specific to that patient, but you're going to be able to hear it. And if you record it, it's going to be in your doctor's voice. So
I see. Yeah. You can make it personal.
Oh, absolutely.
I know you got a graphic there, Scott, pulling up. Just mentioning, CN says it's interesting because I have asked the same question to Alexa, Siri, and Google Home. And think Siri was best at finding the answer. Alexa would start with, I can hear her saying that right now.
Oh, yeah.
And deliver a web result from, fun experience.
Yeah, and it really depends on what platform and what the specific question is. We do the exact same thing just because it's what we do for a living. So we'll try to see who actually has the best answer. And sometimes it's Siri, sometimes it's actually Google, sometimes it's Alexa. So it really depends on the type of question it is, or the type of information that it is. So because Google is Google and they are the search engine, typically we find that they have, more times than not, they have the better answer. But again, it depends on if someone's created a skill or an action, if some of that information already exists. So there's a lot of different factors, Bing versus Google as far as the search engine. So there's a host of factors, and it's really just kind of specific to that instance.
Sometimes we make them troll each other too.
Oh yeah,
really
that's a good idea.
And that can get where you find the Easter eggs, a little bit of the personality, because I love asking Alexa about Siri. And by the way, all of ours are called Echo because of these particular conversations, so they don't.
I know. Yeah, you can't. I know. I keep waiting for this thing over here to respond, but she hasn't yet. Is there a tool to see popular long tail keywords?
There's not a specific tool, but you can go through and within Google, when it goes through and autofills, those are effectively your long tail search. YouTube, same kind of a thing. So you can kind of use some of the existing tools or the platforms that exist to start to get to that. And then if you actually have a skill or action through those platform companies like I was talking about, or even if you've built a native thing through custom development, you actually have a dashboard or like a search console within there, and you can see directly what people asked. So you can actually see all of the words within it. It doesn't tell you who it is, doesn't give you a user ID or anything like that, but it does at least tell you the specific questions. And the great thing about that is, as we've created these experiences, we try to cover off on as much as we can up front, but of course we're not going to think of everything. And because we have access to those search tools within it, if we start to see the same question come up time and time again, we just add a new answer and map it to that question. And all of a sudden we're fulfilling that as well. So it is kind of an indirect benefit of creating a skill or action where you do see directly the questions and the language that your audience uses.
Another tool I could say is if you have Conductor or Bright Edge or any other SEO type of tools. Some of them do. I know that Bright Edge does have a long tail. And so they start to give you some information that'll help you start to sort that out. The important thing too is it isn't just about what's like popular. It's also about what's most relevant to you, because it's sort of this, it is going to have to be this leveraging of customer needs and wants, or your audience needs and wants, and your objectives, and they have to be together. I think sometimes with keywords, you'd be able to be like, hey, if I can get in the territories, as you get more specific, it's really important that you give a good answer, because it can hurt you if it's not a good answer.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And you get to know, we all know our own brands, our own customers, our own journey. All right, Scott, let's, you guys have a graphic here that I've seen this before. They showed me this before we jumped on live here, guys. And this is, it looks messy, but just hang with it for a second. Once you get what's in front of you, you'll be like, okay, I see how this works. Yeah.
So what we did is we looked at kind of the entire voice.
Oh, hang on just a second. CNP, one more question that's really relevant.
And it's a great question.
So so do an FAQ page on your site to capture long tail keyword searches. Is that the goal?
That is certainly a huge opportunity, because Google, I think about 6-8 months ago, announced that they're actually indexing FAQ pages, and it's specifically to be able to provide answers to their voice assistant. So yeah, if you have long tail FAQ answers on your website, it's certainly going to help you rank ahead of other people, because the dirty secret about FAQ pages, especially for a lot of brands, is typically it's a junk drawer of content that we don't know what to do with. So I will just throw it on the FAQ page, or the copywriter's like, well, we need some FAQs, and they'll sit down and just write out a bunch. And they're not actually frequently asked.
Or they're not helpful.
And so this is an opportunity to literally map those questions that your audience has and provide, a quick 1 or 2 sentence answer. That's going to start putting you in the right direction. And then you can take that intelligence and apply it to voice applications as well.
Yeah. And that's an important piece of it, is even when you hear the Wikipedia and it reads off Wikipedia, Wikipedia is meant to be read, not to be spoken. That is a great example when you start thinking through your voice content of how short you have to be. Like, we have a rule of no more than 72 words. And it depends on those words, because your cognitive load of hearing all that is going to be a little bit shorter, but it's also a get to the point and solve my problem.
Interesting.
So that's where your branding challenges come in a little bit more strongly of, okay, I don't get to start with, here's my soliloquy about what my brand values are. I have to demonstrate them.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. Okay.
All right. Back to the graphic.
New graphic. Yes. Good question, Cian.
Absolutely.
That was, awesome.
So again, this was something that we looked at kind of the entire voice ecosystem and broke it into 2 camps. So there is voice as the end product, and that's really your standalone application. So it would be games, education, utilities, entertainment, whatever. And you're building that specifically as the end destination for your audience. So really, if you have an Alexa and you've enabled any skills for games, let's say, or any of those types of things, that's really what we're talking about there. There's also this other part that we see, and it's really part of the customer experience. And so this is where your traditional customer journey map comes into play. Understanding what you're already doing in the different touch points and tactics, and actually looking at ways that voice can enhance it. We're big believers of not reinventing the wheel, but using voice to enhance something that you're already doing. So, you have the idea of FAQs and being able to answer those for your audience. And this is part of kind of the awareness consideration and potentially even retention. Lifestyle content, product onboarding, in your case, Chris, patient support instead of customer support. But being able to look at different touch points you already have and look for ways that you can make it even easier for your patient, your consumer, whatever, to just use their voice and get their answers or get the information they're looking for. There's also, if you're doing any sort of e-commerce, there's the purchase or the direct ROI, where you do have product information, store lookup, locations, making purchases, tracking, your order and statuses and things like that. So you do have the ability to do voice commerce. And as a matter of fact, they're estimating that it'll be $80 billion in 2023. So we just saw some research that actually showed that about 40% of smart speaker owners are actually using their voice to make purchases.
Wow.
And so we're well on our way in that side to actually see a very robust VCOM ecosystem really starting to bubble up.
Yeah, that's for those of you who didn't just catch that number. If you are in e-com or you support e-com brands, 40% of people who own smart speakers are making purchases via those speakers in the e-com space. That's an enormous population.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
And so I do want to say that data comes out of the UK, and we're actually going to be helping bring that study to the US. And just knowing that our adoption numbers are higher, we're confident that it's in the same or going to be higher.
I'm sure we're higher than that
here. And there's actually a host of factors. And really, convenience is really the number one reason. If it's easier to make a purchase using your voice, people are going to do it. If it's harder, they're not going to do it. So,
and Americans are uniquely gifted at early adoption and spending money. And you put those two things together, and
it works. Absolutely. Well, and one of the things too that we did a talk and did some study, checked into some research about how COVID's changing people's buyers' behaviors. So not only are we seeing, like, we have our early adopters and we have the people who are jumping in, The other thing that we saw is that, what was it,
9%.
That 9% of people who were like, I'm never buying anything off of my phone or mobile, those people are starting to make purchases that way.
Wow.
So you're even getting the people who the 80-20 rule, we're like, yeah, we're not going to get those people. We're getting them because unfortunately, what brand relationships and commerce look like today has completely dramatically shifted in March.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the other side of this, of where if you're losing share at shelf or in store, this is an opportunity, and you're actually in someone's home. So if they ask about your brand, they're inviting you in, which is something we never, we haven't had that in how long as a marketer.
Yeah.
But you've got to make sure that that works and that you're answering the question that they're asking for. So that's where then again, it's not just launching that skill and then kind of walking away. You have to, with that skill or action, have to continue to make sure that it is relevant. So that's where we talk about error logs of making sure that you're doing that, and that you're going to build so much trust up that you're actually, it's going to be a lot more powerful than, say, when you had our Twitter, like when we all got excited about Twitter. This is going to be that I'm actually going to serve your need, and I'm actually going to be using your words.
Yeah.
So it's really, it's almost like free customer research once you get going, as long as you maintain it.
Mm-hmm.
So this graphic is by no means exhaustive of everything you can do, but it's a really good starting point for marketers to start to go, well, I've got lifestyle content. How can I extend that into the voice space? Or I've got a customer support issue. How can I actually use voice to support my customers better? So it's really, hopefully, a thought starter and a place where people can begin to explore where voice fits within their specific circumstance.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. I love this. All right. So, wow. I don't know if anybody else feels this way, but I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. There's so much opportunity here. And sorry, family show. How in the world am I going to ever implement this? So the reality of this is it's complicated. And fortunately, there's super geeks like you guys who are just crushing it, and not just here to help us in our community. Thanks for being in our Facebook group. I mean, folks, the people that are in this amazing Facebook group are true geniuses. And there's so many amazing people like Scott and Susan who are hanging out with us every day, right here, ready to answer questions. Yes, yeah, mind blown for real, right? So ask questions in our group for sure. Ask questions with speed for Scott and Susan. But Scott and Susan, how do we actually, if you're like, okay, I don't want to do this. And we teach this a lot in our group. Like, if you're an expert in what you do, then do that and freaking let somebody else do the stuff that you're not an expert in. So if they want your help and they want to say, hey, can you help my client with this? Can you help my brand with this? How do they interact with you? And before we say that, there is no commission, no affiliate, no nothing with anybody we interview in our group. This is me just finding experts that are relevant to what we do and bringing them in here. So how do they find you?
Well, if you go to our website, we've got some information there. So it's pragmatic.digital. Or if you shoot Susan or myself an email, I'm Scott with 1T at pragmatic.digital, and she's Susan at pragmatic.digital.
I'm also in the group, so you can find me that way. Or we do lurk on Twitter.
Oh yeah, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn, and all those other places.
Twitter and LinkedIn, and there it's pragmatic, and it's DIGTL. You'll have to look it up.
Will you type it in a message down there before when this wraps up? Just drop as a
yeah. And then there's also at SJW75, because back when the billion years ago I had to pick a username when Twitter was first starting up, I went with the simple, nothing clever. And Scott is at, I think, just Scott Westwater, 1T. So you can find us that way easily. And we're happy to share. We also, as just a little bit of a shameless plug, we do have a book that you can read if you want to know more.
Yeah.
He's going to pull that up.
I have to, I'm sorry.
And it's voicestrategybook.com is where you can purchase it. You can purchase it on Amazon, but little secret for everyone is you only have to pay shipping and handling
if you buy it
directly from our website. So
the obvious question here is, if I ask my smart speaker to play that book for me, like an audiobook, can she?
So we do not have an audible version of it, but we do. If you go through our website, there is a audiobook version. I just didn't go through the process of getting it on Audible.
I know. So you actually have an audio, okay, cool.
Yeah. So in addition to the print book, which is actually fulfilled through Amazon, so regardless if you buy it through Amazon or through us, it's coming from the same place and it's the same printing. We also have an ebook, an audio book. We also have an opportunity to buy some of our tools and worksheets that we use with our own clients. So yeah, if you go to Voice Strategy book, all that stuff is there.
Yep.
So be sure and list those links down here below in the comments because you get a lot of good. And so you're saying if we go to your website though, we can get the book for cost plus shipping, or
no, just for shipping,
free.
No cost.
Just shipping. Okay. Oh, that's super generous. Thank you. Okay,
cool. Yeah. I apologize to anyone international, just because international shipping rates suck these days. But
so get the audio version.
International, it's actually probably better or just about as good to get it through Amazon. Because depending on what the exchange rate is and things like that, the shipping cost may be as much to buy it direct. But here in the States, it's just whatever it costs to ship it out and get it in the mail and all that good stuff.
And the one difference between our book, because there are other books that are on it, is our book talks more about the strategy of how you can use what you've got and figure out what the right use cases are. We are a big proponent of what's called useful and usable, which means not only is it relevant to the audience you're writing it for, and it's helpful in either answering a question or helping them complete a task, it also is usable, which means that they can actually understand it. So it isn't just, here's some stereo directions, good luck. And so we work so there's some guiding principles in the book that help you start to figure that out. And I think to answer your other question, where you're like, where do I get started? Start small. So maybe it's your FAQs and you put them up, or maybe it's optimizing your web content. Right now is a time when you can start to lay down some foundations. We like to say it's sort of like if in 1997, I knew what SEO was when I built my first website. And which is funny because like how many years later it took us to be like, oh no, this is amazing. It's kind of like knowing that ahead of time and being able to and we all know how hard it is to take off that number one position. Well, this is an opportunity to kind of jump ahead and get into that number one position. And so it's really exciting. But it's also, again, some of it is like SEO where it's not going to be tomorrow, that you see the results, but it's going to be something where you get a foundation. And then as you learn more about your customers, you can add, or you can enhance the experience. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. So for the novices like me that I know that our search engine people and a lot of our site builder, but particularly our search engine and traffic people, they already know your names. I know that. You guys get featured to speak at South by Southwest and places like that. So truly appreciate you being in here. And for the rest of us novices like me, you're listening to like the Jedis in Star Wars before like certain planets knew there was such thing as a Jedi. Like you got them on the Zoom call and you're like, oh crap, there's Jedi out there. Well, this is the real thing. And Scott and Susan, thanks for the tips. Thanks for the practical help.
Absolutely.
Thanks for links to your site. But also thanks for helping us, like with your book. Thanks for helping us with a guide that's made for the rest of us so we can understand what do I do next and not just how do I start coding, but what do I do next?
Yeah.
And that was really our goal with this book. So the first third of it is what the opportunity is. So we lay, kind of the business case out there. And then the next 2/3 are our tools, processes, workflows that we use with our own clients. So there's like worksheets that she's created that we use for our clients from a content strategy standpoint that are actually in the book that you could just grab and either recreate or whatever just to start doing stuff for your own brand. So we're big proponents of, even if you don't work with us, just do it the right way. And this is hopefully the foundation to get you started on that path. And if you need help, we're here. But ultimately, we want to make sure that voice is successful because this is one of those transformational technologies where if we screw it up now, it's going to set us back for multiple generations. And so like the idea of like Star Wars and Star Trek, where you're talking to computers and they're talking back, is here now. We want to make sure that continues and that it actually is helping everyone versus a hindrance or not fulfilling what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. And there's so much, like right now we're talking about the business side of it. And part of the reason we wrote our book too is the first voice conference we went to was and it was, gosh, what, 3 years ago? Yeah. We were there, and they're like, well, I'm a developer. Oh, I work for Amazon. I work for Google. And they're like, what do you do? And we're like, we do none of those. And they're like, why are you here? Because low code is really important, but also it's sort of what's the business side of this? What's the business reason? On the other side of it is, part of the exciting things of voice is that it is inclusive. It's not just about accessibility, it's also inclusivity. You have an opportunity to start to create experiences that can be translated into multiple languages. There isn't a barrier of being able to read. There are so many ways that this can work, that it can help someone in a way that, and you're gonna expand your reach in a way that you didn't quite expect. That's the other side of this technology, and why we want it to succeed. It's great if we, paying mortgages are important, but it's also the whole idea of seeing how this can be used for such good. And we're part of an actual, we are part of an organization called the Open Voice Network. And that's actually to make sure that it stays used for good. So they're working on things like, open standards to ensure that there's consistency, addressing privacy issues, working with governments, organizations to make sure that what it is, like, there is a legit parent concern of, is this listening to me? It is understanding, like, we're taking upon ourselves digital data privacy has actually, since the web has been a big deal, but it's now that this is coming up. And so it's like, all right, we don't want Congress being ill-informed and then suddenly making rulings that make it impossible for this to do the good it can. How do we make sure we're using this responsibly and ethically? We even have an ethical use task force. So it's exciting to be able to be at the forefront of that. But that's the other side of it too, of making sure that there is some ethics, but they're business ethics. I mean, let's be honest, we do need to make sure this is meaningful. No one's going to adopt it if it doesn't ultimately prove out.
It's got to make money, and not just for Google.
Right. Absolutely.
So, wow. Okay. Will y'all promise that when you see that AIs are becoming sentient, you jump back on this show and tell us what in the world to do to hide?
Yeah. Here's the secret with that. We're still pretty far away from that.
Yeah.
Right now we're parlor tricks and a lot of if-then statements from a coding standpoint. So we're not quite aware, and Terminator is not right on our doorstep.
If worse comes to worse, right now you can speak with a Scottish accent and it won't understand.
Oh yeah,
no. For some strange reason, it cannot handle Scottish accents.
So all of our community members from the northern UK, you're all good. You're safe.
Yeah, pretty much.
You're going to be frustrated, but right now.
And if you want to see a funny little skit, if you look on YouTube for Scottish voice elevator, it's quite funny. So
please link that in your comment. All right,
a little adult language, but it's pretty funny.
We can handle it. Thanks everybody. Y'all are awesome. I truly appreciate you guys hanging out. Thanks for the book offer. And for making that accessible to all of us. And I'm honestly looking forward to getting off this call and hanging out with Kimberly again, who runs our Done For You service, Scenthold, to figure out how we can figure out how to implement some of this stuff, because this is scary and exciting, and I know we're early on in the process, so we got a shot at elevating ourselves and our clients above the rest, which is what a cool advantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much.
All right,
Talk soon.
All right, talk to you soon.